Do you have any feedback on what I sent you earlier this week?
When I listened to it as I was running,
Yep.
which is actually kind of a rare thing for me because I don't really have a music player. So I have my old flip phone, and then I had the headphones plugged into the flip phone, and the flip phone is so bulky that when I put it in my pocket, it started jumping out. So I'm carrying my 10-year-old flip phone around listening to the podcast. And also when the temperature dips below freezing, MP3s start to slow down on this phone.
What?
Yeah, I kind of want to explore, what the scientific cause of that is, but it is interesting. People's voices get like really slow, and so. But anyway, there was none of that on this run. But the reason why I give it that caveat is that I do find that when I'm thinking or listening to something while I'm running, I think it makes it extra interesting.
So we should put a disclaimer on the podcast saying it's only advisable to listen to it while running
Yes,
for
definitely.
maximum enjoyment.
Yes, yes. Well, it's like anything like that. Well, I mean, I have this experience while running. I don't know if you have a similar experience, but I'll be thinking about something. I'll get really excited about the idea and how like engaging it is. I'll write it down when I come home as I'm still sweating, right? So it's like the paper is a mishmash of ink and sweat, but I get the thought down, and then I go back and read it later, and I'm like, that's kind of all right. So here we are podcasting at 7:23 in the morning,
Yep.
which is a couple of hours notably earlier than what we typically do. The general reason being we're trying to find a more consistent, more reliable time that works for both of our schedules.
That's right.
I have quite a busy life with the job and family and house and all that. My kids are teenagers, so it's all very active and yada yada. I try and go to sleep at a good time. I try and wake up at a good time. I try and meditate. I try and exercise. All these sorts of things, and so fitting everything into the schedule not an uncommon problem. So we tried to do this, and so we were trying to work out this time. I was asking you what time you wake up on the weekends, and you're like, oh, 5, sometimes 4, and I'm like, what? 4 in the morning on a weekend?
Yeah, I was up at 5 this morning.
Wow. Okay.
I try to get up at the same time every day, whether it's the weekday or weekend.
Okay. So that's a good place to start for me because, and this is a pretty big topic for me. So, how many days do you have to talk about this? So the general topic in my mind right now is establishing consistent routines and habits slash disciplines, however you want to call it, which should then benefit your overall rhythm of life, right? And so subsections of this for me include sleep, exercise, meditation, etc. And sleep is a pretty core one because it affects the rest of them. And so I have tried for years and read about and experimented with different things about getting a consistent regulated sleep cycle, going to bed, waking up at the same time, that sort of thing. And when I'm up in the morning, I feel fantastic. Like if you were to ask me if I'm a morning person, I love being up in the morning, but it's incredibly hard to get up in the morning, right?
Yep, yep.
So to me, I hardly ever feel better than when I wake up in the morning after a decent night of sleep. I don't have to be completely refreshed, but just not, more than 5 or 6 hours. Shower, meditate, exercise, eat some nice oatmeal, drink some coffee, and then I could take on the universe, right? But
Yep.
and I can achieve that on any particular day just through sheer force of will. But it's the consistent regularity that just completely eludes me, and it has for many years.
And why is that? Is it because you have a family that is a draw on your attention, or
That's part of it. I mean, I don't want to blame them all for it, right? I mean, if
of course not.
I mean, objectively speaking, yes. If I was a bachelor, it would be easier to regulate what time I would go to sleep. And so, for example, last night was Friday night, and so it's the end of the work and the school week, and so people stayed up a little later than normal, and so I got to bed like an hour, hour and a half later than I normally would on a weekday, on a work day.
And what time is that?
So typically our family, and this I think is actually on the earlier side of the street, given what our peers tell us. But we typically go to sleep as a house about 9:30. So that's when people are like in their rooms, lights out and stuff. And so
Good.
yeah, if I'm not experiencing some other variable that's keeping me awake, then I could get to sleep around 10 and then wake up 5:30. So that's ideal. And that's if there aren't any exception variables, then that goes well. The problem is when that gets kicked off its rails for some reason, it doesn't take that many number of nights to make it feel unsustainable. I feel like I kind of have a low resiliency to keeping on the tracks of a good routine there. So
Right, right.
and it just sort of cycles around and around. And then once I get knocked off the habit, then I'm like, oh, I'm off the habit. And then so there's this emotional trough, right, where I have to kind of resolve to get back on the habit, and then drink a cup of coffee, write a great schedule, get all psyched about the schedule, go and try and execute the schedule again. It stays on for a number of days or weeks, or if it's really good, a number of months, and then it gets kicked off, and then back sort of cycles around. So that's been going on for me for like decades, I would say. So when you're like, oh yeah, I could just get up at 5 on the weekends, I'm like, woo, tell me your magic secret.
Well, I don't know if there's much of a secret other than I'm just trying to be very consistent with it. I think there's certainly a benefit to having a consistent sleep schedule. So I try to do 9 to 5 every night. I mean, it's just me and my wife here, so I don't have a lot of other distractions that will pull me away from a schedule.
Right.
My wife goes to work early as well, so that's probably why we fell into that, is because we had similar work schedules, and so
Right.
we share the same sleep schedule too. I mean, I've always gone into work early, mostly because my wife always worked early because of her job. So I've always altered my work schedule so I could get into the office by 7 a.m. and get up at 5. So it's no fun to lose 2 hours on each end if you have a different work schedule.
So once it comes to the weekends, you don't feel tired from the week because you've gotten a consistent amount of sleep every weekday?
Yeah, I feel pretty good. I mean, I'm also a morning person too, so I prefer to get all my stuff done in the morning. I prefer to record podcasts in the morning. It works better for me anyway. So
4 in the morning, dude.
well, sometimes I'll get up earlier just because I wake up spontaneously, and rather than just thrash around in bed, I'll get up and start doing things.
Yeah, so the literature would have me believe that it's much more important to fix the wake up time than it is the going to sleep time. So if you're trying to get on a regular sleep schedule and you're trying to sort of regulate your body's expectations, then it's more effective to always get up at the same time and vary when you're going to sleep based on how tired you are, rather than go to sleep at the same time and get up based on.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I mean that's kind of one of the reasons why I try to get up at the same time on the weekend, because you don't want to wake up early on Monday and feel awful again, when you have to go back to work. Although I should admit that my wife will admonish me if I don't mention this, but I will often. One of my favorite things to do on the weekends is to get up very early, putter around the house for a little bit, and then take another nap.
Oh, nice. Like what time when the morning nap come?
Like, get up at 4, bounce around for 2 hours, and then lie back down on the couch again for another little snooze for an hour. That's just pure joy to do that on the weekend. And you can only really enjoy that if you get up early. I mean, if you lied in bed until 9,
Right.
it's not as enjoyable as getting up and doing something, then having a sneaky nap after that.
That's pretty sweet. Putter around the house. I love that notion. Puttering. Like when you say puttering, I assume that this isn't like high efficiency productive time. This is like I'm enjoying the fact that I don't have an agenda.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Or I can just work on whatever is exciting me at that particular moment, whether it be on some project on the computer or reading something or doing some chore.
Yeah, I had a friend who told me one of the best lessons he learned from his dad was getting up. His dad used to get up. It was this term. That's why I keyed on the term puttering. His dad used to get up on the weekends and basically do nothing for a couple of hours. And he never understood it until he was middle-aged and did the same thing. It was like, you know what? It's actually kind of nice to be awake and not have to do anything.
Yeah, it is. And then to just lie back on the couch there and just say, you know what? I'm just going to have a little snooze here for a little bit. And then maybe when I get up at 9, I'll do the dishes or something.
Sweet. Do you find Do you find you have a creative rhythm of the day where you are more creative, however you self-define that, at like in the morning versus the evening versus other times of the day?
Oh yeah, I think early morning is when I try to do work. It's when it's my most productive time.
So productive versus, I guess I'm trying to make a distinction between productive and creative. Like, so if you were to divide work between stuff you just have to sort of muscle through that doesn't require a lot of figuring out.
I'm referring to productive work being something that I'm using my brain for, not
Okay,
doing
not chopping wood.
housework. Right, exactly.
What do you think about the concept of inspiration? Do you think that that's a real thing? Do you experience that when you're working creatively? I mean,
Oh yeah.
I guess there's a spectrum of creativity from the extreme of chopping wood that doesn't require. I mean, I don't mean to disparage wood choppers out there. You know, to this thing we're doing right now is more to the left of the creative spectrum. So you think, because that's kind of a fluffy, foofy, non-sciencey kind of thing, right? Inspiration.
Oh, I think it's definitely something tangible that one can experience. I'm certainly when I'm working on creative projects, there's times of the week or whatever that I can get a lot more done than other times. There's sometimes I string together a few days where I'm just I'm really on top of something that I can really get a lot done on, and other times it just doesn't come to you, especially when you're doing more creative stuff like writing or
Right. So there's this kind of neurological explanation of inspiration, which is you just happen to get in a in an environment where the inputs are conducive to the structure of the thing that you're thinking about or working on, and the neurons just happen to be firing in these nice conducive patterns, and you're able to access all those neural pathways, and that's why those useful thoughts occur to you at that time. The more fluffy version, and I don't use fluffy in a disparaging way. I'm a pretty fluffy person. So inspiration in this more abstract sense is that the thoughts, like you just said, the thoughts come to you. So then the question is, well, where are they coming from? Right? When you get a really creative, insightful thought or vision or feeling, is that simply the neurons clicking into place and until you look at something that you hadn't looked at before? Or is that actually coming from a source that is either outside or within or from some other aspect of yourself other than just a neural pattern clicking into place? You know what I mean?
yeah, it's coming from somewhere in your brain, and I guess the environment that you're in at that moment is more conducive to inspiration. Is that what you're suggesting? I'm sure you're familiar with the phenomenon that a lot of people experience that they do a lot of their best thinking in the shower, for example.
Right.
Is that something that you're familiar with?
Yes, yes. And I mean, so to me that's indicative of how our mind creates thoughts on the conscious and unconscious level. So you're consciously working on some problem at work, for example, and you're banging away at it, you're banging away at your the context of that problem is very much in the forefront of your consciousness, and maybe you're not getting the result you want, or it's not coming to you, quote unquote, right? And so you leave it, you go do something else, and you free up your mind from actively consciously working on something, and it's that act of letting go that allows your subconscious to sort of churn through,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it makes the connection, and then it's like, okay, consciousness, I have this thought, I'm ready to give it to you. Just let me know when you're free, okay? And you're not going to be able to receive that or become aware of that if your conscious mind is forcibly affixed to the topic at hand or some other topic. And so it takes a time of relative inattention, like a shower. I mean, most people have showered before, and so you don't have to like pay high attention while you're in the shower.
I find that plausible. I would buy that. I mean, I certainly experience that when I take a break at work and go for a walk. Is then all of a sudden when you come back to your desk, oh, there's the idea I was looking for.
So in my mind, the definition when you break down the word origin is to breathe God into you is where is I think is the origin of the word inspiration. Even if it isn't, it's this notion that it's getting down to the origin of thought, right, and the origin of how that occurs. That there is some sort of source or presence or it's not simply neurological pattern clicking into place. When you imagine Carlos Santana up on stage and he's jamming away and he's feeling totally inspired, he's got his eyes closed and he's you like that.
Well, where else would it come from if it's not from your neurons?
Well, so is it coming? So when I'm listening to a song on the radio, where's that song coming from? Is it coming from the radio, or is the radio receiving it?
You're gonna drop the philosophy bomb on us, aren't you?
Dude, dropping the philosophy. Is it too late to change the name of our podcast? Dropping the philosophy bomb? I like that. Right. So it's like, what is the origin of that song? And you would probably say, okay, well, yes, the radio is broadcasting it. It's receiving the signal, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The radio is a receiver of that vibration, of that frequency.
Okay, you're not saying that our brain is a receiver of something that's originating outside of our brain, are you?
Well, just take visual perception. Right now, I'm having an experience of watching this little bar go up and down. Right, but what is my experience? My brain is simply collecting the sensory input from my visual cortex and feeding that data stream into my brain. And then what is actually outside of my brain? What is going on here? There's light particles, right, that are bouncing off each other in this field, and my brain is picking up on information from that energy field through one of its sensory inputs, and then it's translating it into an experience, right?
Right.
Much like a radio would pick up a signal from the radio station and translate it into sound.
Okay.
So if Carlos Santana is up there jamming, where is that coming from? Well, I would probably say that his neurons are picking up an energy transfer signal, just like my eyes are picking up an energy transfer signal. Now, in the case of Carlos Santana, that's a much more abstract level of input and decision making process, where he's going along and his fingers are moving to different spaces on the guitar and in very subtle and fast ways, to the point where he's not consciously directing it, right? I'm sure while he's jamming, he's not like, oh, I think I should do an E flat here for a quarter of a second and then move up the fretboard, right?
Right. It's instinctual. It's based on his experience.
Yeah. And yet, he would probably say that it's not just random, that he feels quote unquote inspired. I don't want to speak for Carlos Santana. Maybe we can get him on the podcast, but.
Well, can you be inspired without having years and years of practice and experience?
Playing guitar?
Right, exactly. Can a person pick up a guitar, have never touched it, and be inspired to create something amazing? I would think not.
I guess I would say yes, but let's just clarify a little bit. Like, I think you can pick up a guitar, feel inspired, and then when you play, the expression of that inspiration, right? The expression of that state, how well you actualize the potentiality, how well you're describing that state of consciousness might be very poorly expressed because you haven't practiced on the guitar. Whereas if you had spent years and years training your fingers to do certain things in response to certain stimuli, then the expression of that inspiration would be that much closer. It's not unlike what we're doing right here, Tom, right? With like podcasting. Right. You're asking me a question about inspiration, and I'm like, ooh, let me describe to you my cool thought about inspiration. And as I'm speaking to you right now, I'm searching for words in my mind. I'm trying to pick out the best word. And hopefully this whole process of expressing these words on the fly is a little bit more refined than when we started a month ago. And hopefully months from now, it'll be even more refined as we hone that skill. But what we're honing is that external expressive skill, similar to how you might play a guitar, and not that we're Carlos Santana. Right.
Yeah.
But
Carlos Santana, based on his years of practice and experience, is better able to express his inner inspiration and communicate it to others than someone who is not trained at an instrument. But they might have equal amount of inspiration. Is that your?
Yes. So you could think of it as you could be very inspired with no skill. You could be very inspired with lots of skill. You could be not inspired with no skill. I guess that would be kind of sad. Or you could be not inspired with a lot of skill.
I very often feel like I'm very inspired, but with no skill. So I can identify with that.
Really? That's interesting.
So circling back around again, because I want to try to
Yeah, yeah.
pin you down in here.
Okay.
Now, where's this inspiration coming from? I thought I heard you suggest that it was from an external sources, but I might be
Well, I
misinterpreting that.
think yes. So I think so. I'm not claiming that there's some. I'm not yet claiming. But if the expression of a state of consciousness that you're not expressing, what I'm trying to get at is that the expression of a state of consciousness, whether it's Carlos Santana being inspired or any other more mundane experience, isn't an expression of the neurological configuration pattern at the time. I'm more suggesting that your neurological pattern is receiving input from outside the world and then expressing itself in response to that. Much like you receive input and respond in any other mundane experience. So it's obvious that we can pick up on the vibrations of light with our visual cortex. We can pick up on the vibrations of air with our ears. We can pick up on
Mhm.
on other thing. We can pick up on people's facial expressions on that kind of subtler level. And then you can pick up on how, and this is a really big tangent, so we might have to close this off. But you can pick up on how your experience feels to you, and then express that. And so if you accept the supposition that our input can have more and more refined levels, more and more abstract, more and more subtle, then maybe what Carlos Santana is picking up on is just a really subtle, refined feeling of his experience. He's no longer thinking about what he had for dinner that morning. He's not thinking about what time does the concert start. He's completely abstracted his mind away from the action of his experience, and he's just sort of feeling whatever that feeling is, and then he sort of catches on to a feeling, and he allows that feeling to direct his energy. This sort of gets back to he's not actually consciously deciding that I want to do an E flat for 3 seconds. That to me is a pretty big clue that this isn't a self-directed stream of activity, that he's responding to something.
And what is that something?
I don't know, dude.
But doesn't that discount Santana's effort in creating what he's creating?
No, because I think there's two things that he has to do in order to achieve that experience. One is he has to work up and refine the skill. No matter how amazing a person he is, no matter how inspired he is, if he'd never learned to play guitar, he wouldn't be able to solo like he does. Right? There's some real lunch pail kind of, you got to put the hours in to refine that skill. I don't know if he can play piano. I'm sure he probably can, but let's suppose he can't play piano. If he sat down to a piano without having ever learned how to play, he wouldn't be able to express that nearly as clearly as with a guitar, right? That's one. There's another aspect of it. Getting yourself into an inspired state. And how do you do that? Because I think it's possible to have a skill without being inspired to express something, without being able to creatively, without being able to channel. I guess this is another word that is a clue for me to understanding this, is that when people get into the state of creative flow, they describe it as effortless, and that they're not directing it, they're just sort of transcribing what is coming to them. And so it feels like they are a channel, they are a conveyor of some sort of energy impulse. Whether that's just picking up on an abstraction of all the physical energy in the world or all their experience coming to their mind, they're not the conscious agents that are driving the train.
Well, surely if someone feels like they're channeling something, doesn't necessarily mean they are channeling something.
True.
You're not suggesting that Santana is not the creator of what he's creating, or that he's more a translator of some other experience, that he is in the process of just receiving like a radio. That seems to be a bit far-fetched to me.
Huh. But if he's not consciously directing the quarter second of the E flat, then what is?
His subconscious, his experience. I mean, who else would be directing it?
Well, I'm not suggesting that there's some puppet above him that's directing it. That's kind of a big distinction, though, isn't it? That I am deciding this versus I'm simply letting go and allowing my mind to interact.
It's just a different method of using your own resources, right? You can direct your brain power to a certain end, or you can just let your instinct do it, which is still part of your physical makeup as well. It's in your brain. It's in your DNA.
So when you say instinct, do you mean that that you're limiting the sources of what's influencing this source of inspiration to what? Simply your inherited lizard brain tendencies?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know where else it can originate from other than your own intellect and experience. Do you think inspiration originates within the human brain?
Originates. So my current conception of it is that the brain is more of a receptor.
Okay.
Now whether that
So what does that mean? If you're receiving something, it has to be
yes.
transmitted from somewhere else.
Yes.
And so where is that coming from?
Okay, so this is pretty broad, but I guess another way to think about that question is what influences are operating on my consciousness? Right? What's influencing me to act? So certainly, so you brought up instinct. So certainly the need to sleep, eat, reproduce, survive are major influences upon my consciousness. Would you accept that as a basic premise?
Yes.
Okay. In addition, there can be other influences upon my consciousness that I can react to or pick up on. Like people talk about being moved by an experience, right?
Hmm.
Like you had your eclipse experience and would you say that like moved you? Would that be a good way to apt description?
That's certainly the way I did describe it.
Okay. So that experience made you feel a certain way. And so that influence operated upon your consciousness in a different way than that was a different source of influence than
Yeah, but that was a stimulus. It wasn't the source of the influence. It was just a stimulus of my internal makeup that produced a reaction.
okay, then peel it back then. What created the eclipse? No, I don't mean like in the divine sense. I mean like that okay, the sun and the moon are
Right.
moving in a certain pattern
Yeah.
and they created this thing. So you can think of there's a pattern of energy and a system outside of yourself that's operating and you interacted with that system of energy and it created in you a feeling.
Yes, but the source of that feeling was me. It wasn't anything that the sun and the moon did. I mean, the sun and the moon don't care.
Right. But the cause of that feeling though,
Yeah, the cause is different from the source.
is it?
Sure, the source is me. The cause is the stimulus that inspired the source to feel that emotion.
But in that sense, it's like I guess here's a good way to describe it. In that sense, the astronomical system, the patterns of it are playing like you're the instrument. The sound is the feeling, your brain is the instrument, but the player, the Santana in this case, is the natural system, is the astronomical pattern, is the eclipse. I would imagine, man, we've really got to get Santana on this podcast now. I've like set him up as such an example. That he would describe himself as when we talk about being a channel, that he's the instrument and he gets him. Why is he deserving of praise and effort, right? Is that he is able to get himself into this receptive state where he is feeling the energy pattern external to himself.
What is this energy pattern you keep talking about?
Okay, so take the eclipse example. That's an energy pattern, yes?
How?
So the fact that a moon let me describe an eclipse correctly. I don't want to say like one person said the sun passes between the earth and the moon. So that the moving of those celestial bodies is a movement in it's an energy pattern. It's the movement of different parts of physical parts in the physical system.
Okay, I wouldn't necessarily call that an energy pattern, but that's just semantics.
Okay, well, okay, you know what? Scratch that then. Forget about energy pattern. It's just it's a movement in a physical system,
Okay, fine.
and
That's good.
you are certainly consciously aware of it at some level, and there may be part of it that you're subconsciously aware of, some impact of that experience that doesn't percolate up into your consciousness. And so, imagine if Santana is able to decouple his attention from the mundane things that are going on in his life and tune in to how he feels in response to the greater system of his life, of his existence. How does that feel to him? And then he feels a certain way in response to that. And then in the context of the guitar and whatever song he's playing, he allows that to direct the sequence of notes, the quarter second of the E flat, as opposed to saying, I'm going to play an E flat for a quarter of a second. So when we talk about the source of the inspiration, that's more what I'm getting at. This sort of player instrument expression dynamic. That's what it feels like to me. To completely encapsulate it within an individual seems, I don't know, it seems limiting.
I don't find it limiting at all.
Okay.
It seems to discount our own creativity to suggest that it's just a translation of outside energy patterns.
Well, yeah, and in a sense, it is. Yeah, depends on what you mean by creativity. Then I guess
The act of creating something unique. That's a uniquely human trait, and to describe us as just translators or receivers, it downplays our evolutionary importance.
Oh, I love downplaying our evolutionary importance, though. What's wrong with that? Little humility for the Homo sapiens? Come on now. Here's one of the key nuts to the problem for me. When you have a thought, to me, it's pretty clear that you did not consciously, intentionally create that thought.
Consciously, correct, yes.
Well, when I'm speaking to you right now, and I'm trying to decide about the next thing I'm going to say, this is how the experience feels to me. Like if you were to ask me, how does it describe to me the feeling and your experience of expressing a thought? We say that thoughts come to us, or I had the thought. To me, it's like it comes into my purview. It's like something that comes into my mental scope. I notice it, and then I express that I have noticed it. It's not that I'm sitting there on a blank piece of paper and saying, you know what, I want to have the thought that this is how I think about inspiration to Tom, and now I'm going to write down the words. To me, that's a completely different thing than, it's like if you're outside and you're looking at the sky and a bird flies by, you don't say that you had a bird, or rather, you don't think that you are the originator of the bird. The bird came into your visual stream. So in the very same way, thoughts come into my mental stream, and I notice the thought. I don't feel like I am the creative source of the thoughts that I have.
Well, that's a shame. To me, it sounds like you're ascribing a supernatural origin to this stuff.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be supernatural. That's an interesting topic.
But do you say that's a possibility?
Define supernatural.
In this context, I would define it as being outside of the self and from an unexplained source.
Are there sources outside of myself that I have yet to explain? Is that what you're saying? Of course there's sources of things outside myself. The earth is outside myself. The moon is outside myself.
But those are explainable.
Okay.
I guess we're circling around the topic. I think what I'm trying to get at is whether you believe in something like divine inspiration.
So I would say maybe, but to me the big problem with this is defining the terms. Like, what do we mean by divine? What do we mean by...
By divine, I mean supernatural.
Well, again, I don't have a really good working definition of supernatural, so I'm struggling to answer your question.
All right, let's see what Mr. Internet says. Supernatural, attributed to some force beyond scientific understanding or the laws of nature.
Do you think science completely understands every aspect of the universe?
No.
Okay, then by logical definition, the supernatural exists because it's not yet understood by science. So the nature of existence, which is not yet understood by science, is that a correct interpretation of that definition?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, score one for the ped. Woo! Fluffy, 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 fluffy.
Then I would go back to divine inspiration as a term.
Okay, what is divine?
Of, from, or like God or a god.
Okay, Tom. I didn't think we were going to get to this question this soon. What is God? Define that. All right, dude? By the way, just as you're R&Ding there.
Yep.
When I think about what I find most engaging and compelling to think about, it often comes back to this pattern within myself of I feel like I am resolving two aspects of myself, two personas, two perspectives that on the surface seem incompatible, but at the at the bottom to me feel harmonious, and so I'm working towards integration of those perspectives. And so in this context, I obviously feel a strong adherence to the perspective of rational science. On the other hand, I definitely have a big fluffy inspiration aspect to me as well. And so it's this sort of mergence of these two concepts that I find so interesting to work out. So yes, you were defining God if you achieved a what does the great internet tell us?
The good old define on Google says the creator and ruler of the universe and source of all moral authority, the supreme being.
So and your original question was, what, do I believe in God?
Do you believe in divine inspiration?
Okay, based on that definition, no. So could you read it one more time, because there were some key words in there that can articulate why I feel the answer is no.
The creator and ruler of the universe, the source of all moral authority, the supreme being.
Yeah, so ruler and being. So I feel like when I try and circle around this concept of the divine or God and try and integrate it into my other perspectives of understanding the universe, like the scientific perspective, I feel like one of the biggest problems is that these terms have been co-opted and hobbled by their use by humans over the course of the centuries. Primarily used by humans and religions. And I don't want to get all anti-religious on people here, but I think a distinction can be made, drawn, without passing any value judgments, that the concept of God as presented by any one religion, and there are obviously major differences in how different religions think about this term. A distinction can be made between how religions use this term and put forth this idea and other definitions of the term. I think it's still a useful term and concept, even if we reject the definitions that religion offers to us.
Okay, so you're happy to say divine inspiration in the sense that it's something unexplained. It's the mystery of life.
Yes, but I mean, I don't want to dismiss my fluffy side too much. So the other sort of topic we're circling around here, at least in my mind, this notion of materialism, right? Is the entire nature of the universe a purely physical manifestation, or are there other aspects to being and consciousness that are beyond that model, beyond that framework? Because when you're talking about supernatural / divine / God, the common conception is some sort of beingness that floats above the knowable scientific physical world. And to me, so the closest definition that I found useful is that the divine is, and this is just for my own practical purposes, from my own results-oriented perspective. I'm not purporting this as some objectively more truer version than what works for other people. But the divine is without mind, without physical form, without attributes at all, cannot be known, cannot be described, but can be experienced. The sort of undifferentiated, absolute presence, and even presence is a inaccurate way to say it, because I'm ascribing an attribute to it, and I've just said that it has no attributes. And yet, at the end of the day, can be experienced. When I try and describe it and articulate it, it fails, and yet.
Well, it's certainly something that's hard for anyone to articulate. I mean, by the fact that it is, by definition, indescribable. It's unknown. It's unknowable. Even if it's from a source internal to us, it's still at this point in our evolution unknowable, because we haven't figured out how our brains work.
Yeah, and I guess the two aspects of being a person in the world that most clearly point me in this direction are, one, that I can actually feel my experience. The fact that experience is even possible, to me, makes no sense. This is one of the core problems of philosophy. You can explain the mechanisms of experience. You can explain the physical systems that are operating outside of ourselves, the sun and the moon causing the eclipse, and write down all the formulas and laws of gravity and mechanics, etc. And you can explain the neurological mechanism of the human mind and how that inputs experience and etc. You can't explain why that feels the way it does. Right? You can say, oh, when you are in this feeling, then I can do an MRI scan and I get this particular configuration, or there is this level of dopamine in your system, or there's this chemical coursing. But, but why that creates a feeling to me is very, very unknown. And the other aspect of being a person in the world that points me in this direction is just this notion of consciousness. The fact that we're self-conscious at all is
Amazing.
yeah, it doesn't make any sense. In fact, I feel like these two core aspects of the human situation, that we can feel our experience and that we're conscious, are so not understood. Such huge, obvious things that don't fit into our current model that for the most part we ignore the fact that they are so unknowable. Because if you really stop to think about it and you didn't stop thinking about it until you figured it out, you'd never get out of bed in the morning. Like, evolutionarily speaking, it would be disadvantageous if instead of going out and hunting and gathering and cooking your food, you just sat there at the fire going, whoa, dude, I can feel my experience. Right? I kind of feel like natural selection has reduced my meta tribe just because it hasn't been it's not conducive. Like, you can't think about this stuff too much, otherwise you just stop doing the stuff that you need to do. And so one philosopher calls it the hard problem, consciousness, which people dispute, but that's just one way to say, yeah, that's something we're not figuring out anytime soon. and all the explanations of it to me are very unsatisfying. The sort of the pure materialistic, the computational biologist, they describe the associated states of consciousness, but they don't describe what consciousness itself is. And that and the feeling of experience to me are very much non-material phenomena. And they're real. Every person is conscious and feels things.
You suspect they are.
Right. Okay. Right.
I'm just a signal coming in through your earphones, aren't I?
That's true. I could be a brain in a vat, Tom. This could all be one grand simulation.
Have I passed the Turing test?
It's a really good question, Tom. Yeah, I think you've passed the Turing test.
Is there, maybe we should tie a bow on this topic we're currently talking about. I don't know if there's anything else we need to cover.
We figured out inspiration, God, consciousness, and what else have we completely figured out here, Tom?
Yeah, we figured out a lot of things. Unfortunately, I had to cut a lot of it, so our listeners won't be able to hear all the most important bits.
That's sad. Well, they should know that, that we're very that we're imperfect beings, and that we got confused along the way. We don't want to totally pretend that we're smooth as silk, right?
But basically what I got out of that conversation is you're not necessarily ready to discount the fact that we are all tendrils on some pan-dimensional being.
No, not being. So this is the problem with religion. Can I just rant about religion? So here's another. Remember I was talking about before how the things that I'm most interested in, the most compelling to me, is the resolution of two perspectives within myself that on the surface are conflicting and at the source feel harmonious. Another example of this for me is one, I feel a real, and I just have to be honest, I feel a real passion about how I feel religion has misrepresented the divine / God / states of consciousness. And yet the other aspect of me says, get off my high horse. Like, I try and be open-minded and compassionate and empathetic. Why does it bother me so much if somebody else's perspective works for them? And
right, we're all ultimately arguing about something that is completely unknowable.
Yeah, so like as I rail, quote unquote, against religion, quote unquote, I try and pull back and be like, is that totally fair? But anyway, yeah. But I feel like the rational mind, the rational, educated, Western science-based mind, to me it feels like kind of a baby, throwing out the baby with the bathwater situation, where the baby is some higher sense or some different sense of our consciousness and the nature of the universe, and the bathwater is religion. And not that other aspects of culture don't do this, but there are so many good examples throughout history of human beings being not so nice with religion and leveraging it for their own ends, that in rejecting that kind of human activity. We also reject the concepts that it purport. It's kind of like religion is the unapproved flag bearer of, for lack of a better term, of the divine, of consciousness. And one of these things, one of the core aspects that I think religion misrepresents is God slash the divine slash the ultimate, whatever we're talking about here. We need to find some term like X or something. Is a being, quote unquote. Like,
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, we had some Bible. I was raised Catholic, but in the first page of the Bible, there's a picture of God creating the world in Genesis, and it's literally this big dude. He looks like maybe 150 feet tall with a flowing robe and a beard and like light shining from behind his head, scanning the cosmos. And so and that image stuck in my mind that this is the religious connotation of the religious expression of the divine, that it is some corporal sentient being with a mind and a will and an intention. To be fair to religion, I think you could come back to that and say, well, that's a kid's book, and the notion of the being of God is more refined than that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a guy with a big beard or even have a physical form, but there is some sort of floating being above the ether.
Well, that's the image that's on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.
Right. And so I think even this notion of, well, we have a more, that's the notion of a non-physically manifested and yet still a being floating about the ether is just a more refined version of that. So a big dude with a beard is like the most non-subtle manifestation. He has a beard, he has a will, he has a physical form, he has a mind, he has an intention, sends you to the good place or the bad place. A more subtle version would be no physical form, but he still has a mind, he still has an intention, still has a presence. And then if you were to abstract that further, you could say, okay, well, a subtler form would be no intention, but still sort of a mind and a consciousness and a presence. And then a subtler version would say, okay, no mind, and yet still some sort of presence. And I guess what my consciousness wants to get at is that if you continue to subtleize and subtleize and subtleize that conception without blinking it out of existence, that to me is what feels like the most accurate expression of I guess the term I use is like the ultimate. And for me, that term works because it implies this sort of you're going an infinite direction on this spectrum of subtlety, and to try and articulate that in words, in a context, right, in a perspective, is to by definition unsubtleize what can't be subtleized. It's try to describe what can't be described.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess that's there's your bow.
There you go. Well, my feeling is that future generations of humanity will start to figure out a lot of these mysteries, and my feeling is that when we do that, we'll find that explanations of these things are a lot more mundane than we imagined. But that's just me. I'm not very fluffy.
We still love you, Tom. You have to be fluffy.
You have been listening to Two Bit Geeks, a podcast about the interesting, the useful, and the frivolous. If you have questions or feedback, get in touch with us at twobitgeeks.com or follow us on Twitter.